There is something about winter that strips everything back to the bone. The trees go bare. The roads go empty. The nights stretch long and dark and completely silent in a way that no other season can match. People like to think that the cold keeps danger away, that the frost and the blizzards and the temperatures that drop below zero create some kind of natural barrier between them and whatever might be lurking outside. They pull their curtains closed and light their fires and tell themselves that nothing bad could possibly find them out here, buried under all this snow, insulated from the world by the season itself. They are wrong. Because winter does not keep threats out. Winter seals them in. It cuts off your escape routes. It kills your phone signal. It buries the roads and freezes the locks and muffles every sound you make until no one can hear you screaming. Winter is not a shield. Winter is a trap. And for the 9 people whose stories you are about to hear, the worst moment of their lives did not happen despite the cold. It happened because of it. Stay with me, because every single one of these stories is real. And before we go any further, if you are new here, welcome to Creepyverse. I need you to hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon right now, because we drop new horror content every single week, and you do not want to miss a single story. Drop a comment below telling me where you are watching from and what time it is right now. I always read them. Now turn off the lights, get comfortable, and whatever you do, do not open your door tonight. Let us begin. Story 1. The ice below my feet. I want to tell you something about January in northern Minnesota that most people do not understand unless they have lived it. It is not just cold. It is not just inconvenient or uncomfortable or the kind of weather that makes you complain while you scrape your windshield. It is a cold that reaches inside you and makes itself comfortable, that settles into your joints and your chest and your bones like an unwelcome houseguest who has no intention of leaving. It is the kind of cold that reminds you, in a way no other environment can, that you are small and soft and not nearly as prepared for this world as you like to believe. I had been ice fishing since I was 7 years old. My father took me out for the first time on a lake about 30 miles from where we lived, bundled me up in so many layers that I could barely walk, drilled a hole in the ice with an auger that seemed impossibly loud in all that winter silence, and handed me a little rod with a tiny jig on the end of it. I was hooked immediately. Not on the fishing itself, though I did love that too. I was hooked on the feeling of standing on top of a frozen lake in the middle of winter, completely surrounded by a landscape that looked like nothing else on Earth, and feeling like I had earned my place in it. Like I belonged out there in a way that made everything else, the noise and the pressure and the relentless mundane grind of regular life, fall completely away. I told myself that on the morning I drove out to Lake Winnebago alone, the Saturday that my divorce papers finally arrived in a manila envelope that seemed insultingly thin for something that was ending 10 years of my life. 34 years old, sitting in the driveway of the house I would have to sell, watching my own breath fog up the windshield of my Ford F-150, holding an envelope that weighed maybe 2 ounces and felt like it weighed 200 pounds. My buddies from the warehouse where I loaded trucks had been planning a group fishing trip to Winnebago for weeks. It kept getting postponed. Bad weather, someone's kid getting sick, overtime shifts eating up the weekend. That morning, I did not want to wait anymore. I did not want company. I wanted the ice and the silence and the particular kind of peace that comes from a landscape so empty and still that your own mind has no choice but to quiet down and follow suit. I pulled into the public access parking area around 6 in the morning. The lot was empty. The lake stretched out ahead of me like a white desert, perfectly flat and perfectly silent, the kind of silence that does not feel like the absence of sound so much as the presence of something vast and old and completely indifferent. The sky was that deep pre-dawn purple that shifts toward blue and then grey as the light builds. I sat there for a moment and breathed and let the quiet work on me the way I knew it could. And for the first time since I had opened that envelope, I felt something loosen in my chest. The forecast had promised clear skies and temperatures around 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold, but absolutely manageable for a full day on the ice, if you had the right gear and knew what you were doing, and I had been doing this for 27 years. I hauled my portable shanty out of the truck bed, along with my auger, my tackle, my bucket, and the sled I used to drag everything. I headed out from shore, past the cluster of permanent fish houses that sat closer to land where the weekend regulars had staked their spots, and I kept walking. Maybe 300 yards out. I wanted to be away from everything. I wanted to find the spot near a submerged point where the walleye liked to hold in the deeper water, a spot my father had shown me years ago, a spot I had returned to every winter since. The ice beneath my boots was solid, satisfying. I could hear it absorb my weight in that particular way that thick, trustworthy ice does, a low creaking compression that sounds nothing like the high-pitched warning cracks of ice that is too thin. The auger shavings confirmed it when I drilled my holes, close to 10 inches of ice. I remember thinking, as I set up my shanty and dropped my first line at 7:30 that morning, that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. No lawyers, no paperwork. No watching my wife, my ex-wife, carefully fold her sweaters into boxes like she was packing for a vacation she had been planning for years. Just me and the cold, and the rhythmic, meditative bobbing of my rod tip in the hole. I caught a few small perch in the first couple of hours, released them. That was not really the point. The point was the sitting, the stillness, the way a frozen lake at dawn makes the entire rest of the world feel like something that is happening to someone else, somewhere very far away. Around 11, the wind started. It came out of the northwest, which is the direction wind always comes from when it means business in Minnesota. At first, it was just steady gusts that made the walls of my portable shanty ripple and snap. I stepped outside to check my tip-up rigs, the little flag rigs I had set about 20 yards away in a scattered pattern, and that is when I noticed the sky had changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in that sneaky, incremental way that bad weather announces itself when it does not want you to have enough time to get indoors before it arrives. The crisp winter blue was gone. In its place was a pale, compressed grey that seemed to press down on the horizon like a ceiling being slowly lowered. I noticed the permanent fish houses in the distance looked smaller, farther away than I remembered them being. I told myself it was the flat light playing tricks, the way a frozen lake under cloud cover can distort distances and make things seem farther or closer than they are. I poured myself a cup of coffee from my thermos and watched the steam curl and vanish in the wind and told myself it was nothing. What I did not notice, what I should have noticed, was that the trucks in the parking lot near shore had not moved. Nobody had come out in this direction. Not a single other angler had ventured past the cluster of permanent houses. And I, in my fog of grief and self-pity and stubborn desire for solitude, had walked right past that warning sign without reading it. I was reeling in another small perch, watching the line come up through the hole when I heard it. A deep, resonant groan that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Not from any particular direction, but from the lake itself, rising up through the ice and through my boots and into my chest cavity where it vibrated against my ribs like a bass note played too loud. I have heard ice make noise before. Every experienced ice fisherman has. The lake expands and contracts with temperature changes, and it makes these eerie, whale-song groans and distant rifle crack sounds that will terrify you the first time and become background noise after a few seasons. This sound was familiar in its quality, but wrong in its intensity. It was followed immediately by a sharp crack that came from somewhere behind me, to the north, loud enough that I set my rod down involuntarily and turned around. That was when I saw my tackle box had moved. It had not fallen over. It had not been knocked by a gust of wind. It was sitting 3 feet to the left of where I had placed it, leaving a faint scrape mark across the ice surface. I stood there staring at it for a moment that felt much longer than it actually was, my brain cycling through explanations and rejecting all of them, and then I felt it through my boots. A slow, almost imperceptible tilt, like the floor of a boat that has just caught the edge of a wave it did not see coming. I dropped to my knees and pressed my bare palm against the ice. The surface was wet. There was a thin film of water spreading across it that had not been there an hour ago, water wicking up through invisible cracks in the ice sheet the way water will when a pressure differential begins to form. My heart started hammering. Not the quick flutter of surprise, but the deep, primal hammering of a body that has just received information it does not know how to process. I scrambled to my feet and looked towards shore. And I saw the crack. It was a jagged black line cutting across the white surface maybe 40 feet ahead of me, stretching left and right as far as I could see in either direction. Black line on white ice means open water. Open water in the direction of shore means the ice has fractured. And the way my tackle box had moved, the way the surface had tilted beneath my feet, the way the water was seeping up from below, meant only one thing. The section of ice I was standing on had broken away from the main sheet, and the wind was pushing it. Slowly, steadily, inexorably toward the center of Lake Winnebago. I ran to my shanty and grabbed my phone. No signal. Of course, no signal. I was 300 yards from the nearest shore access point on a lake in the middle of nowhere, Minnesota. I held the phone above my head like that ancient, useless instinct might somehow extend a cell tower's range by 6 inches, and I watched those empty signal bars sit there on the screen like a small, quiet death sentence. The gap of open water between me and the main ice sheet was widening as I watched it. What had been maybe 3 feet across when I first spotted it was already closer to 8. The dark water churning in the gap was pulling small chunks of ice off the edges of my floe and swallowing them. I thought about jumping it, made calculations about the distance and the stability of the edges and how far I could jump from a running start. Then I watched a chunk the size of a microwave oven tilt off the edge of my floe and slide into the water and vanish in under 2 seconds, and I stopped making those calculations. I made myself stop running in circles and think. My father's voice in my head, calm and steady the way it always was, the way fathers' voices are when they have taught you something important enough that it's stuck. Panic kills faster than cold ever could. Your brain is your best survival tool if you keep it working. Inventory. I took inventory. The portable shanty, its bright orange nylon fabric, the auger, the sled, 50 feet of rope, a small propane heater, hand warmers, half a sandwich I did not remember starting, the thermos now barely lukewarm, no flares, no emergency beacon, no device of any kind designed for this exact nightmare scenario, because I had been ice fishing for 27 years and had never needed one, which is the kind of reasoning that gets experienced people killed. The ice floe I was standing on was roughly the size of a basketball court, maybe slightly larger. I could feel it rotating in slow, grinding degrees as the wind and the current fought over the direction of its drift. I checked my watch. 12:47 in the afternoon. Sunset would come around 5. After dark, the temperature would drop from merely dangerous to actively lethal, and I had maybe 4 hours to solve a problem that I had no obvious way to solve. I made myself visible. I collapsed the shanty and spread its bright orange fabric flat on the ice, weighing down the corners with my tackle box, my auger, and chunks of ice. I stomped loose from the edges of the floe. From the air, that orange rectangle might look like a distress signal. From shore, if anyone happened to be watching through binoculars, the anomaly of a bright orange patch on the white surface of the lake might register as something worth investigating. It was the best I could do, so I did it, and then I walked the perimeter of my shrinking island, keeping track of the new cracks that were appearing along the edges, mapping the safe zones in my head, staying near the center where the ice was thickest and most trustworthy. The snow started at 2:30. Fat, wet flakes that cut visibility down to 100 yards within minutes. I could no longer see the shore. I could no longer see the fish houses. I could no longer see anything except the grey sky merging seamlessly with the grey-white surface of the ice in every direction, an endless, featureless void with me at the center of it. And then, around 2 in the afternoon, the first piece of my flow broke off. I heard it before I saw it. A grinding, tearing sound like something heavy being ripped apart, and then a chunk the size of a large dining room table simply tilted up at one end, cracked free from the main body of the flow, and slid into the water on the north side with a sound like the lid being put on a coffin. I watched it bob for a moment, tilting in the dark water, and then the current grabbed it, and it was gone. Not slowly gone. Gone in seconds, swallowed by Lake Winnebago as easily as if it had never existed. I moved everything toward the center. I pulled the orange fabric into a tight pile around me and lit the propane heater, even though some part of my mind was tallying the remaining fuel and telling me to conserve it. My fingers had gone past painful into that dangerous, deep numbness that is not actually numbness, but rather the absence of any sensation at all. And I needed to keep my core temperature above the threshold where my brain would start making bad decisions. I needed to think clearly. I needed to keep thinking clearly. Nobody knew where I was. That was the thought I could not push away, no matter how many times I tried to redirect my mind back to practical problems. My co-workers thought I was home nursing my grief. My ex-wife had not checked on me in months even before the papers came through. My parents were retired in Florida, and we spoke on Sundays. I had told no one. I had filed no trip plan. I had just driven out here alone in a fog of self-pity and parked my truck and walked 300 yards out onto a frozen lake. And now I was drifting toward the center of a 60,000-acre body of water in a snowstorm, and the only person who knew I was missing was me. I think about that moment a lot, the moment when the reality of my complete isolation became undeniable. It is not a dramatic feeling. It is not like the horror movies where the walls close in and the music swells. It is much quieter than that. It is just a still, cold, factual understanding that you have made a serious error in judgment and that no one is coming to fix it for you. That you will either fix it yourself or you will not be fixed at all. I was huddled next to the heater, wrapped in the shanty fabric, watching the snow fall in curtains so thick that they seemed to have weight when I heard the engine. It started as nothing, a vibration in the air that could have been anything, the wind taking a different tone as it moved through the snow, my ears inventing sound out of desperation. But it grew louder, a distinct mechanical whine cutting through the storm from the southeast, and I was on my feet before I had fully processed what I was hearing. I grabbed the orange fabric and waved it over my head. I screamed. Not words, just noise, just the pure human instinct to be as visible and audible as possible, to announce my existence to the world with everything I had left. Through the snow, I saw it. A single headlight bouncing across the ice, an airboat running fast from the direction of shore, and I waved harder and screamed louder, and the tears came without my permission, freezing on my face before they could reach my chin. The boat circled wide around my floe. The pilot was assessing, looking at the gap between my ice and the main sheet, calculating the approach. Then a voice crackled through a loudspeaker, cutting across the wind. "Stay calm. Stay centered. Do not move toward the edge." They threw a rope on the third try. A thick yellow line that landed 5 feet from where I stood, and I tied it around my waist with fingers that I could not feel, using the not muscle memory that my hands still knew even when my brain could barely form sentences. They pulled me across, dragged me over the unstable, crumbling edge, through 6 feet of water so cold it felt solid, and hauled me onto the airboat deck. The officer's name was Colleen. Weathered face, no patience for small talk, the focused competence of someone who has done this before and knows exactly how close the margin was. She told me, as she wrapped me in thermal blankets, that I was lucky, that another hour and the flow would have broken apart completely. My core temperature was 94 degrees by the time we reached shore and the waiting ambulance. 2 nights in the hospital, mild frostbite on 3 fingers. The kind of exhaustion that lives in places deeper than muscles. The doctors told me I had come within about 40 minutes of a different outcome. 40 minutes. I think about that number. I still think about it. 40 minutes between being here and being a body found in the spring when the ice pulls back from the shore and gives up what it has been holding all winter. I sold all my fishing gear that summer. The shanty, the auger, all of it. People told me I should get back out there, that you cannot let fear win. But they did not understand. It was not fear that kept me off the ice. It was the lesson that the lake tried to teach me that January and nearly charged too high a price for. Nature does not care about your grief. It does not care about your divorce papers or your self-pity or the fact that you have been doing something for 27 years without incident. It just does what it does. And you either pay attention every single time, or eventually you pay a price you cannot afford. Story 2. The knock at the farmhouse door. Anyone who has lived through a real blizzard in a rural area knows the particular quality of silence that settles over the world once the storm gets serious. It is not the absence of sound. It is something heavier and more complete than that. A silence with texture and weight. A silence that pushes against the windows and presses down on the roof and makes the inside of your house feel very small and the outside world feel like it no longer exists. It is the silence of a world that has been swallowed. I had been living in my grandmother's farmhouse in rural Wisconsin for 8 months when the worst blizzard in 15 years decided to use my property as its personal demonstration. She had passed the previous spring, left me the farmhouse and the 11 acres it sat on, and I took it as a sign. My marriage had ended, and I needed a place to disappear to for a while, to hear myself think without the noise of a life that had not been working for years. 28 years old, and starting over completely. There are worse places to do it than a farmhouse at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by frozen cornfields and dense pine forest, with nobody around to watch you figure out who you are when nobody else is defining it for you. My nearest neighbor was a man named Walt Hubbard, 83 years old, a former dairy farmer, sharp as a tack, lived about 3/4 of a mile down the road. Walt had made it very clear when we met that he did not leave his house between December and March unless someone was dying. He watched his road with binoculars sometimes, he told me. Old habit from decades of farming, keeping an eye on what was his. I had thought that was charming at the time. The National Weather Service issued the severe blizzard warning Monday morning. Up to 3 feet of snow, dangerous wind chills, sustained winds that would make travel impossible and reduce visibility to near zero for extended periods. I spent the morning preparing with the methodical focus that my grandmother had drilled into me during every childhood winter visit. The pantry was already well stocked. I filled the bathtub. I confirmed the woodpile on the back porch was sufficient. The wood stove in the living room was my primary heat source. and I had been splitting and stacking since October, because my grandmother had taught me that there were two kinds of people in Wisconsin winters: the ones who prepared in autumn and the ones who suffered in January. The snow started around 2 in the afternoon. By 5, I could barely see the old tool shed that stood 40 yards from the back of the house, just a grey smudge in a world that had gone white. The wind hit around 6, howling through the gaps around the window frames with that particular intimacy that old farmhouses allow in winter, making the walls shudder and the candles on the mantel lean in one direction like they were all trying to lean away from something. I made soup and grilled cheese and ate on the couch by the fire and told myself I was safe and prepared and that nothing could reach me out here. I had earned this peace. I had built walls against the world, literal and otherwise, and tonight they would hold. And then, just after 7, someone knocked on my front door. I want to describe what that knock did to me in the context of that night, because I think the context matters. Not a loud knock, not aggressive. A soft, desperate, rapid series of knocks that communicated urgency without force. The kind of knock that a frightened person makes. I sat on the couch with my empty bowl in my lap and stared at the front door the way you stare at something that has violated a rule you did not know was a rule until the moment it was broken. Nobody came to this house. The mail carrier had not attempted my road in winter since November. Walt Hubbard did not leave his house. There was nobody within a reasonable walking distance who would have any reason to be at my door at 7 in the evening in the middle of a blizzard that the weather service had been warning about for 12 hours. The knock came again, louder this time, more frantic, and beneath the howling of the wind, a voice. A woman's voice, high and thin and trembling, saying, "Please, please let me in. Please help me." I set my bowl down. I walked to the front door on legs that felt disconnected from the rest of me. I pressed my eye to the small window set into the upper panel of the door, and what I saw made me take a sharp, audible breath in the empty house. She was young, maybe 22 or 23 years old, dark hair plastered to her face by snow and wind. She was wearing a thin sweater and jeans. No coat, no hat, no gloves. Her arms were wrapped around herself, and even through the frost-clouded glass, I could see her entire body shaking in the full, uncontrolled way that the body shakes when it has passed the point of being cold and entered the territory of genuine hypothermic distress. Her skin had taken on a waxy, bluish tint visible even in the poor light. She looked like she had been outside in this storm for a long time. Too long. She saw me looking and her face changed. The fear did not leave it, but something else arrived alongside the fear. Something that looked like the desperate, fragile relief of a person who has been running for so long that the sight of a single lit window in an otherwise dark and empty world is enough to make them break down completely. She pressed her palms flat against the door, both of them, and the tears cut tracks through the snow on her cheeks, and she said, her voice breaking on every syllable, "Please, you have to help me. He's going to kill me, please." I ran. I did not know where else to go. Please just let me inside. My hand was already on the deadbolt. My fingers were already curling around it. Every human instinct I had, the ones built by evolution and reinforced by a lifetime of being told to help people in distress, was pulling my hand toward that lock. Open the door. Get her inside. She is going to die out here. The wind shifted direction. It was a small thing, a gust that changed angle enough to push the snowfall sideways instead of straight down, and in that 3 or 4 seconds of altered visibility, I got a clear view of my backyard. The tool shed. The frozen ground between the house and the tree line. And there, behind the shed, 2 figures standing perfectly still in the darkness. 2 people, large, both of them, broad-shouldered, wearing dark winter clothing, standing in the shelter of the shed's bulk, not because they were trying to escape the storm, but because the shed was a position, a place to watch the front porch from without being seen from the front porch. One of them was holding something long and thin in his right hand. I could not make out what it was from that distance and in that light. I did not need to. The wind shifted back. The curtain of snow closed. They were gone, but I knew what I had seen. I jerked my hand away from the deadbolt, like the metal had burned me. The woman was still crying, still begging. Her voice had that particular quality of desperation that makes every human instinct in your body scream that it is real, that this person is genuinely suffering, that you are a monster if you leave them out there. "Please," she said, "I'm begging you. I'm going to die out here." He broke my phone. I couldn't call anyone. I just ran. "Please, please, I have nowhere else to go." She hit the door with her palm hard, and I flinched back from the sound. I told her, loudly enough to be heard through the door and the wind, that I was going to call the police, that they would come help her, that she should stay where she was. What happened next is something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. The crying stopped. Not gradually, not tapering off into quieter sobs. Off, completely and instantly off, like a switch had been thrown. One moment she was making the sounds of a terrified, desperate human being in the grip of genuine terror. The next moment there was nothing, just the wind and the fire crackling behind me and the silence where her voice had been. And then she spoke again, and her voice was a different voice, not a different person. A different voice living inside the same person. All the trembling was gone. All the desperation was gone. What replaced it was flat and calm, and had the relaxed certainty of someone who is explaining something to a person who is not going to change the outcome regardless of what they do. She said, "That's not going to work." I stood in the middle of my living room and stared at the door and tried to understand what I was hearing. Through the small window I could see her face. The crumpled, tear-stained mask of terror had smoothed into something blank and patient and entirely empty. She tilted her head slightly, like a dog hearing a sound at a frequency that humans can almost catch, but not quite. And she looked directly at the window, directly at where she knew I was standing. She told me the phone lines were down, that cell service had been out for hours, that no one was coming to help me. Then she said something that I would not have believed a human being could say with such absolute lack of emotion if I had not heard it with my own ears. She said, "You should have just opened the door. It would have been faster." Then she turned her head, not toward me, toward the back corner of the house, in the direction of the tool shed and the two figures I had seen behind it, and she nodded. One small, quick nod. The kind that passes information between people who have done something together enough times that they no longer need words to coordinate. I heard footsteps, heavy, crunching footsteps in the snow, coming from the direction of the side of the house, coming from the back. I ran. I hit the kitchen, I hit the back door, I slammed my palm against the deadbolt with both hands. It was locked. Through the small window in the upper half of the back door, I watched a shadow pass across the glass, close enough that I could see the condensation from someone's breath on the outside of the pane. I found the landline in the living room and pressed it to my ear. Dead. Of course it was dead. They had cut it, somewhere outside, probably while I was eating soup and feeling safe and congratulating myself on my grandmother's wise old farmhouse wisdom. My grandmother's shotgun was in the hall closet, a 12-gauge Remington that she had kept loaded for 30 years because she said an unloaded gun was as useful as a chocolate teapot. I had never fired it myself, but I had watched her handle it enough times that my hands knew what to do when I grabbed it from the corner of the closet. I positioned myself in the hallway where I had a sight line to both the front door and the back door, the shotgun up, the safety off. The thumping on the back door stopped. The silence that followed it was somehow worse. Then I heard the cracking of wood, not from the back door, from the mudroom, the cheap, hollow-core side entrance that I had been meaning to replace since I moved in. The one that opened directly into the laundry area that I thought of as a secondary door, as though bad things respected the concept of primary and secondary entrances. I racked the shotgun. That sound, that unmistakable chunk of a shell being chambered, echoed through my grandmother's farmhouse hallway, and I screamed that I had a gun, that I would shoot, that they needed to get away from my house. The banging on the mudroom door stopped. For 15 seconds, or maybe it was 5 minutes, I stood in that hallway with my shoulders burning and my eyes wide open, and my breathing the loudest thing in the house. And then I heard the woman's voice again, coming from directly outside the mudroom door, close enough that she must have moved from the front porch while I was focused on the back. She said, calm and flat as weather forecast, "She's got a gun. Remington, looks like a 12 gauge. Silence, then footsteps moving away from the mudroom, moving toward the back of the property, moving away. I did not move from that hallway for a long time. I stood there with the gun until my arms shook and my legs ached, and the only sounds were the storm and the fire and my own breathing. Waiting for the sound of glass breaking, for a door to give way, for something to tell me it was not over. Then I heard an engine. Headlights swept across the front window. A vehicle door slammed, then another, then a man's voice shouting something outside. I did not lower the gun. I moved toward the front window and looked through the gap in the curtains and saw 2 county sheriff deputies on my porch, their patrol vehicle parked in my driveway with its lights painting everything blue and red against the snow. I could barely speak when I opened the door. The older deputy asked how they had known. He said Walt Hubbard had called it in. He had been watching the road with his binoculars during the storm, the way he always did, the 83-year-old man who never left his house in winter but never stopped paying attention to what was happening outside it. He had seen headlights turn down my road that he did not recognize. He had watched the vehicle park. He had watched the figures get out. Something had not sat right with him, and he had picked up his phone. They searched the property. They found the mudroom door hanging off one hinge. They found 4 distinct sets of footprints circling the house before disappearing into the neighbor's property. They never caught the people responsible. A detective told me later that this method had been reported in several other rural areas over the past year, always during severe weather, always targeting isolated homes, always using a young woman as the initial point of contact to engage the homeowner's protective instincts and get them to open the door. He said I was lucky. He said most people would have opened the door without thinking twice. I sold my grandmother's house 6 weeks later and moved back to the city, an apartment building with a doorman and security, cameras and neighbors on every side of me. Some nights, I still dream about that woman's face in the window. The way the crying simply stopped like someone had reached inside her and turned off the switch. The way she looked at me with eyes that held absolutely nothing. And I think about Walt Hubbard, 83 years old, sitting in his house on a blizzard night with his binoculars pointed at the road, watching for the thing that did not look right. I sent him a bottle of good whiskey and a thank you card before I left town. I do not know if he understood that he saved my life, but I will never forget it, not for a single day of the life he gave me back. If these stories are getting to you the way they are getting to me telling them, I need you to do something right now. Hit that like button. I know it sounds small, but it genuinely helps this channel keep going and keeps these stories reaching people who need to hear them. We are not even close to done tonight. 6 more stories after this one, and they get darker. Stay right here. Story 3. What was in the basement? February in rural Vermont is the kind of winter that does not mess around. It does not offer the tentative, apologetic cold of more temperate places. It arrives with purpose and it stays. The birch trees go pale and skeletal against a sky that is the same color as old concrete. The roads ice over in layers, each freeze adding to the last, until the surface of the road is essentially geological. The wind comes down from Canada with the particular viciousness of something that has been traveling a long distance and built up resentment the whole way. I had been living in the farmhouse rental in rural Vermont for 6 months when the storm hit. 11 acres, no visible neighbors. A golden retriever named Penny, who was the most genuine companion I had ever had in my life, significantly better than the husband I had recently exited a 3-year marriage with. I was 32, starting over. I had taken a remote tech job and moved to the middle of nowhere, Vermont, specifically to hear myself think, to spend some months in silence and trees and the particular cleanness of cold air before deciding what my actual life was supposed to look like. I had grown used to the sounds of that farmhouse. Old houses in Vermont winters have a vocabulary of their own, a whole language of creaks and groans and thermal pops that you learn the way you learn any language, by repeated exposure and the gradual mapping of unfamiliar sounds onto known causes. The floorboards groaned when the temperature dropped. Ice crackled against the windows like irregular knuckle wraps. The radiators clanked and hissed with the dramatic flair of 100-year-old plumbing. I knew all of those sounds. I had catalogued them. I was fluent in my house's winter language. Wednesday started like any other day that week. Coffee that never got hot enough. A work call with my camera off because I had not brushed my hair in 2 days. The weather report mentioned a storm system moving in from Canada. By noon, the snow was coming down in curtains that erased the tree line within an hour, and I felt that quiet, cozy sense of enforced stillness that can be deeply peaceful when you have everything you need and know where you have to be. I had firewood. I had food. I had Penny, who was as content as any creature in creation when her person was home and the stove was running. Around 3 in the afternoon, the power went out. A soft click, and then the warm electrical hum of the modern world disappeared, and the house went quiet in a different way. I lit candles, started the wood stove, felt genuinely grateful for the excuse to disconnect entirely. Then my phone buzzed with an emergency alert. The message was clinical in the way official emergency messages always are, the language stripped of anything that might communicate the actual human weight of what it is saying. An inmate had escaped during a transport accident on Route 12, approximately 9 miles from my location. Carl Eugene Vickers, 41 years old, serving 18 years for aggravated assault and armed robbery. Considered dangerous, possibly armed. Last seen heading northwest into the Green Mountain National Forest. Northwest, directly toward the stretch of wilderness that bordered my property. I read the alert 3 times. 9 miles. In good weather, 9 miles was nothing. But in a whiteout blizzard with temperatures dropping below 0, surely no one could survive in the open long enough to cover that distance. That was what I told myself as I double-checked the deadbolt on the front door and wedged a chair under the back door handle. That was the story I told myself, because the alternative story was one I did not want to be inside. I tried to keep busy as the afternoon became evening, fed Penny, heated soup on the wood stove, read by candlelight, checked my phone obsessively for updates, watching the signal flicker from one bar to none as the storm deepened. The isolation that had felt like freedom that morning had begun to press against me from all sides in a way that was difficult to distinguish from suffocation. The sounds of the house, so familiar, so mapped, so fully understood, suddenly felt like something I needed to verify. Every creak required a source. Every pop required an explanation. I caught myself holding very still for several seconds at a time and just listening, cataloging, sorting the familiar from anything that might be new, anything that might have come in from outside the vocabulary I had built. Penny lay by the stove with her head on her paws and watched me pace with those calm brown eyes that dogs use to communicate that they know what is happening before you do, and they are deciding whether or not to tell you. Then around 9 at night, she lifted her head. Ears pricked forward, body going rigid. That particular stillness that dogs fall into when they have received information that has not reached the human in the room yet. She stared at the floor, not at the windows, not at the doors, but at the floor. Specifically at the old heating vent near the baseboard, the grated cover over the duct that connected to the basement below. And then a sound began in her throat that I had never heard from her before. Not a bark, a growl. Low, continuous, building slowly in volume, the way a growl will when the dog has decided that whatever it has detected is not going away. Penny was the gentlest dog I had ever known. She greeted strangers with a wagging tail. She had never shown aggression toward anything in her life except the vacuum cleaner. She was not a guard dog. She was not a threat detection dog. She was a golden retriever who believed in the fundamental goodness of the world and communicated that belief with her entire body every waking moment of her life. She was not believing in it now. I heard it too, beneath the sound of the wind and the fire and Penny's growing growl. A scraping noise, faint but deliberate, coming from somewhere below the floor, below the house, from the basement. The farmhouse had a basement that I had never used. The previous tenant had warned me about it when I signed the lease. Rotten stairs, prone to spring flooding. No reason to go down there. I had gone once in my first weeks in the house, found nothing but crumbling stone walls and a dirt floor and the kind of deep, absolute darkness that makes you aware in some animal part of your brain that you are underground, that you are below the surface of the world where things live that do not need light. I had confirmed the padlock on the interior basement door. I had noted the exterior cellar doors on the east side of the house, the heavy wooden doors set into the ground that opened outward from ground level. I had checked the security grate that my landlord had installed over the interior of those doors after a break-in at another property. I had given those doors a tug, confirmed the grate was solid, and then forgotten they existed. I could not forget them now. The scraping continued, intermittent, irregular, like something being dragged slowly across stone. I sat in the armchair with Penny growling at my feet, and I thought about the exterior cellar doors on the east side of the house. I thought about how they were buried under snow now. I thought about the grate. I thought about Carl Eugene Vickers, 41 years old, desperate and cold, and 9 miles from my property, heading northwest through the Green Mountain National Forest directly toward me. I did not sleep. The sounds from the basement came and went all night. Sometimes 20 minutes of silence, long enough to almost convince me it had been nothing, a pipe, or a settling foundation, or my own fear manufacturing input where there was none. Then a sudden thump that made both Penny and I snap to full attention, a scrape, a rhythmic movement that had the unmistakable quality of something deliberate rather than something accidental. Around midnight, a new sound, metallic and rhythmic, like a wrench being tapped against iron. Tap, pause, tap, pause, tap. The sound of someone testing a barrier for weaknesses, looking for the point where the resistance was lowest. The security grate on the interior of the cellar doors, 15 feet away from where I sat, was making sounds like someone on the other side of it was getting acquainted with every bolt and bar, learning the structure of the thing that was between them and the warmth of my house. I grabbed my phone. No service. The storm had taken down whatever fragile signal had existed before. I grabbed the landline. Dead. The storm had done that too, or something had done it that was not the storm. I sat in the armchair with a kitchen knife across my lap and a cast iron skillet within arm's reach, and watched the hallway that led to the padlocked basement door. And I thought about what was on the other side of that door. A man in the dark, numb with cold, working at iron bars with whatever tool he had managed to find or fashion, desperate for the warmth he could probably smell rising through the vents above him. That image, so specific and so vivid, pressed against the inside of my skull all night. The clinking at the grate continued until sometime after 3 in the morning. And then there was a sound I had been dreading, a groan of protest like something giving way under sustained pressure, a sound that was neither the house settling nor the wind finding a new frequency, but something that was recognizable as a structural failure, a giving, a yielding, and then silence. I gripped the knife until my knuckles ached. The silence after that groan lasted the rest of the night. When dawn finally came, I pulled on my boots and my heaviest coat and walked out to the east side of the house. The cellar doors were still closed, still latched, still buried under snow mostly, but with clear signs that someone had dug them out during the night, the snow around them disturbed, the ice gouged in places where hands had worked at the frozen ground. The footprints started at the tree line and circled my entire house 3 times. I followed them with my eyes in the pale morning light, watching them loop around the front porch, past the kitchen window, around the north side by the propane tank. 3 complete circuits of the house before they stopped at the cellar doors. They did not lead away. I ran. I grabbed Penny and my keys, and I dug my Subaru out of the drift with my bare hands in 15 minutes, because the alternative to getting out of that driveway was not one I was willing to accept. 3 days later, my landlord called me back. He had sent someone to check the property. His voice had changed. The security grate was bent outward from the inside. 2 of the bolts had sheared clean off. There were deep gouges in the wood of the interior basement door, the marks of someone who had spent hours clawing at it from below. And in the far corner of the basement, beneath a pile of old tarps and rotted insulation, they had found a nest, empty food cans, a filthy blanket, a sharpened piece of metal that appeared to have been fashioned from part of the grate itself. Someone had been living down there. For how long, no one could say. Carl Eugene Vickers was captured 6 days after the storm, 40 miles north of my property, suffering from frostbite and hypothermia. He claimed he had been hiding in an abandoned hunting cabin the whole time since his escape. Maybe that is true. Maybe someone else was in that basement. Some other desperate person who found my cellar doors and spent a winter night in my basement trying to break through to where I sat above him with a knife, listening to every sound he made. I tell myself that sometimes, at 3 in the morning when I cannot sleep, and I find myself lying in my apartment listening to the sounds of the building around me. I tell myself it was not him, that I was never in the kind of danger I thought I was in. But I remember Penny growling at that vent. And I remember those footprints circling my house 3 times before stopping at the cellar doors and never coming back out. I live on the 3rd floor now. No basement, no cellar, no crawl space. And when Penny looks at the heating vent near the baseboard and goes very, very still, I do not sleep. I just sit in the dark and listen. Story 4. The Old Man with the Gun. There are emergencies that announce themselves loudly, and there are emergencies that arrive through side doors, quiet and patient and entirely unexpected. The kind you do not recognize as emergencies until you are already inside them. I was 26 years old, finishing up my nursing degree, working part-time at a veterinary clinic in a small town outside Seattle. I had not planned to become anyone's emergency response in the middle of an ice storm. But when the worst ice event the Pacific Northwest had seen in over a decade shut down my neighborhood for 3 days in early 2024, plans became irrelevant and proximity became everything. My apartment complex sat at the end of Burwood Lane, next to a cluster of older houses that had been there since the 70s. One of those houses belonged to Howard Freely, 83 years old, widower, sharp, funny, opinionated, the kind of old man who had a story about everything and told it with the timing of someone who had been honing the same material for decades. His wife Meredith had passed 6 years before I moved in. He had lived alone since. He grew tomatoes in the summer, impossibly good ones, and left bags of them on my doorstep without knocking. I shoveled his walkway in winter. We had a good arrangement built on mutual respect and the understanding that neither of us needed to make it more complicated than it was. The power grid collapsed on day 2 of the ice storm. 3 counties gone. The temperature outside was 19 degrees and dropping, and Howard's house was dark and had been dark since the previous evening. I called his landline and got nothing, which I attributed to the downed lines. By noon, I was worried enough to go check on him in person. I bundled into every layer I owned and shuffled across the frozen yard to his front door. The house felt wrong from the outside, in a way I could not have explained clearly if I had tried. Dark houses look different from each other depending on why they are dark. A house dark because the owner is at work feels empty. A house dark because the storm took the power, but someone is inside. And okay feels inhabited in a way you can sense from the sidewalk. Howard's house felt like a third option. It felt occupied in a way that was tense. I knocked, waited, knocked again harder, called his name. And then, after what felt like a long time, I heard footsteps inside, shuffling across the floor toward the door. Slow and deliberate. The deadbolt clicked and the door opened a crack. Howard's face appeared in the gap. His eyes, usually warm and crinkled with humor, were different. Flat. Scanning. The eyes of someone running a calculation I could not see. He looked at me the way you look at something you do not quite recognize, working at it from the outside, trying to locate the familiar thing you know should be in there somewhere. He said, "Who sent you here?" I laughed because I thought he was joking. He was not joking. Inside, the house was maybe 50 degrees, cold enough to see my breath. Howard was wearing a wool coat over 2 sweaters and a knit cap pulled to his eyebrows. He seemed smaller than I remembered, compressed by the cold somehow, as though the temperature was not just around him, but working on him from the inside. I explained I had come to check on him, offered coffee from my thermos, mentioned the power situation, mentioned that it might be another 2 or 3 days. He listened with a stillness that was not the stillness of a person absorbing information. It was the stillness of a person waiting for the information to stop so they could respond to the thing behind it, the thing they had already decided was there. He said, "I know the boy from the apartments. Young kid, glasses, blue truck." He was describing me, precisely me. I reminded him of this. He shook his head. He said, "That boy wouldn't come in here pretending to help. You people wait for storms like this. You wait for the lights to go out so nobody sees what you do." I kept my voice soft. I had learned enough in my nursing courses to understand what I was looking at. Dehydration, hypothermia, isolation. Any one of those things could impair cognitive function in an elderly person. All 3 together, compounded by the disorientation of darkness and the absence of routine, could create a complete fracture from reality that looked from the inside exactly like clarity. Howard was not losing his mind because he was weak. He was losing his mind because his body and his circumstances had conspired to temporarily dismantle the normal architecture of his cognition. He was terrified. He was cold. He had probably not eaten since the storm started. And whatever the dementia that I did not know yet was progressing in him had done to his brain's ability to regulate fear, the isolation had amplified it to a volume I was now inside of and could not simply exit. He disappeared down the hallway. I heard a drawer open. I heard the unmistakable handling of something heavy and metal. He came back with a 12-gauge Remington, wooden stock worn smooth from decades of use, held it across his chest with both hands. His hands were steady. That detail was important, and I noted it. I raised my hands, palms out, took a step backward, started talking. I talked about the tomatoes, the big heirloom ones from last August, the ones I had eaten standing over my kitchen sink because they were too good to eat at a table. He did not lower the gun, but something moved in his face, a flicker of something working toward recognition. I kept talking. I talked about jump-starting my truck the previous winter, about the way he had told me a 40-minute story about the electrical work he had done on this house in 1978, about his wife Meredith, about how she was probably waiting out the storm somewhere safe and would be back when the roads were passable. At Meredith's name, something shifted. The barrel of the gun drifted slightly toward the floor. He said she had gone to the store hours ago. His voice wavered on the words like he was not entirely sure they were true even as he said them. Meredith had been dead for 6 years. I did not correct him. He told me to sit on the couch. I sat on the couch, and we entered one of the strangest stretches of time in my life. Me on the freezing cushions with my hands visible on my knees, him in his recliner with the Remington across his lap, both of us visible only by the single kerosene lantern on the coffee table that sent our shadows lurching up the walls every time one of us moved. He talked sometimes, fragments of memories spanning decades, the through line of logic connecting them accessible only to him. 1982, wiring a house, his daughter. I did not know he had a daughter. Her name was Lorraine. He said her name quietly, with the particular softness of something he had not said aloud in a long time, and something about the way he said it told me they had not spoken in years. Around 8 o'clock, his energy collapsed. His eyelids grew heavy. His chin began to droop toward his chest, and the shotgun slipped sideways in his grip. I watched him carefully, watched the gun, waited for the moment. I shifted my weight forward. His eyes snapped open. The barrel came up. He said, "Don't, I know what you're doing." I sat back, raised my hands again, and he stared at me with that terrible, exhausted fear for a long moment, and then his face crumpled into something that was not anger and not confusion, but grief. The simple, naked grief of a person who is lost and knows it. "I'm so tired," he said. His voice broke on the last word. "I'm so tired of being afraid all the time. I don't even remember what I'm supposed to be afraid of anymore." I made a decision, not a rational calculation. A decision made in the gut and the chest, the kind that bypasses the part of the brain that is keeping score and goes straight to the part that knows what is right. I stood up. I walked toward him. He raised the gun. His finger hovered near the trigger. I kept walking until I was standing directly in front of him, close enough that if he fired, there would be nothing left of me. I looked into his eyes and I said, "Howard, you're cold. You're tired. You haven't eaten in a long time. I'm going to sit down next to you now, and we're going to figure this out together. I'm your neighbor, and I'm worried about you." The barrel pressed against my stomach through my jacket. Cold metal, real and immediate and loaded. Then something moved behind his eyes like a cloud crossing the sun in the wrong direction, and he lowered the gun. It clattered to the floor and Howard began to cry. Deep, shaking sobs that moved through his entire body. I sat beside him. I found crackers and water in his kitchen, and I fed him small amounts while he drifted in and out of lucidity, sometimes calling me by my name, and sometimes calling me names I did not recognize, his brother maybe, or an old friend from another decade. When morning came, I got a weak signal and called an ambulance. The paramedics told me later that Howard was severely dehydrated and in the early stages of hypothermia. Both had triggered an acute episode of delirium on top of what the hospital eventually confirmed was progressing dementia. His daughter Lorraine flew in from Ohio 3 days later. They had been estranged for over a decade. Howard moved into assisted living that spring. He never remembered the night with the gun, never knew how close he had come to killing me or how close I had come to leaving him alone in that frozen house. I visited him a few times before he passed away the following winter. He was always glad to see me. He always said, "You are the boy from the apartments, the one with the glasses and the blue truck," and I would say, "Yes, that is me," and he would nod like he had known all along. Some nights, when the weather turns and the power flickers, I still feel that cold metal against my stomach, still hear his broken voice asking me who sent me there. The answer, I suppose, is nobody. I just came because it was the right thing to do. Story 5. Lost on the Mountain. Naomi and I had hiked Crescent Peak close to 30 times since we moved to Colorado. We knew that trail the way you know the hallway to your own bathroom at midnight, without thinking, without looking, by the accumulated map that familiarity builds in your body rather than your mind. We had done it in spring when the meadows exploded with wildflowers in colors that seemed slightly too vivid to be real. In fall when the aspens turned the whole mountain into a wall of gold so intense it almost hurt to look at. And yes, in winter, when the snow transformed everything into this silent cathedral of white and gray and blue shadow that both of us loved more than any other season on the mountain. 6 years of marriage, hundreds of weekends. We considered ourselves experienced. That word, experienced, would haunt me for a long time afterward. The forecast for that February Saturday showed clear skies until evening, temperatures around 20 degrees, minimal wind. We packed our standard winter kit, hand warmers, extra layers, emergency blankets, protein bars, water. We left the car at the trailhead parking lot at 9 in the morning, planning to reach the summit by noon and be back down by 3. Comfortable margins, nothing aggressive. For the first 2 hours, the mountain gave us exactly what we came for. Naomi walked ahead of me the way she always did, her red jacket a bright, warm beacon against the white, her breath puffing out in small clouds that the morning light caught and turned briefly luminous. We talked about ordinary things, her sister's pregnancy, the leak in our basement that we kept postponing fixing, whether we should finally get a dog now that we had the yard. I remember exactly how I felt at the stop we made around 11:15, the flat rock above the frozen creek where we always sat for water and a protein bar. I remember looking at Naomi's face, pink from the cold, and thinking about luck, about how strange and good it was to be exactly where I was, with exactly who I was with, doing exactly what we were doing. The weather changed so fast that I genuinely still struggle to describe it as a natural event. One moment we were walking through sunshine. The next, a grey wall came rolling over the ridge above us, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees in the time it takes to draw a breath. Within maybe 10 minutes, the sky went from clear to completely overcast. The first flurries started, light at first, the kind that makes you smile instead of worry. Naomi laughed and stuck out her tongue to catch one. I pulled out my phone to check for updated weather alerts. No signal, normal at that elevation, and the radar from the morning had shown nothing until after midnight. We decided to turn around. We were experienced. We would outpace whatever was coming. By the time we reached the major switchback below the granite outcrop, visibility had dropped to 50 feet. The snow was no longer light. It was coming sideways, driven by a wind that cut through every layer of clothing like the clothing was not there. The trail had disappeared under fresh snow. Naomi was still ahead of me, but her red jacket had faded to a dim, uncertain blur in the white. I shouted for her to slow down. We stopped to put on our goggles and zip everything closed, standing close together with our backs to the wind. She grabbed my hand. She said we needed to stay close, arm's length apart, no more. I do not know when I lost her. That is the part I cannot locate no matter how many times I've returned to it. We were holding hands, and then we were not, and somewhere in that transition, the storm swallowed the space between us as completely as if she had stepped through a door that closed behind her. I kept walking, head down, following what I thought were her footprints, but fresh snow fills footprints in seconds in a storm like that, and I was probably following shadows and hope. I called her name. The wind took the sound before it could travel more than a few feet. I turned in a full circle, shouting, and saw nothing but white in every direction. No red jacket, no movement, no response. I made the decision that I have second-guessed every day since. I decided to retrace my steps and find her, rather than staying put. Every survival guide ever written says stay put when you are lost. Let rescuers find you. Do not compound the problem by introducing a second moving target into the search area. I knew this. I knew it in the same way I knew my own name, and I let fear override it anyway. I picked what felt like the right direction and walked. The terrain I found myself in, after what I estimated was 20 or 30 minutes, matched nothing on any map I had in my memory of Crescent Peak. The trees were different, older, thicker, no trail markers anywhere. And then I broke through into an opening and found the logging tracks. Flat ground, wide, cutting through the forest in a straight line. For one blinding second, I thought it was a road and felt hope so intense it almost knocked me over. It was not a road. It was an old logging operation, stumps poking up through the snow like rotten teeth, heavy machinery tracks frozen into ruts and ridges that the snow only partly smoothed. I had never seen this area. It was not on any map I had ever used. I was somewhere off every grid I had brought with me. Mountains rose in every direction. They all looked identical, white slopes vanishing into grey cloud. The sun was going down. I knew the math. Below zero tonight. Hypothermia within hours of darkness if I could not find shelter or find my way back down. I was 34% battery on a phone with no signal, and the cold was draining it faster with every minute I stood still. My father's voice, not a memory, almost a presence. When we had been turned around on a hunting trip in Wyoming when I was 11, he had told me, water flows downhill and people build near water. Find the creek, follow it down. It will lead you somewhere. I closed my eyes and listened past the wind for the sound of moving water. Nothing. I chose the logging track that pointed most consistently downhill and started walking, counting my steps to keep my mind from disappearing into the fog that I knew was hypothermia beginning its slow infiltration. The fog that feels like tiredness before it becomes unconsciousness. I found the creek at the point when the last grey light was fading toward darkness. A dark line in the white, barely visible, the sound of water still moving beneath ice. I turned and followed it downstream, staying close to the bank, climbing over fallen logs and pushing through undergrowth that grabbed at my jacket like hands trying to hold me in place. I talked to myself out loud, song lyrics, names of people at my office, what I was going to eat when I got home. Anything to keep the language centers of my brain firing, anything to hold back the fog. The fence appeared like a promise, old and weathered, running along the far side of the creek. Fences mean property. Property means people. I crossed the creek at a narrow spot where rocks broke the surface, soaking my boots in water so cold it barely registered as temperature anymore, just information. On the other side, a path, real and worn and used by human feet. I followed it. And then I saw the lights, yellow and warm, coming from a small cabin through the bare aspens. I tried to run, and my body would not do it, so I shuffled as fast as I could manage, waving my arms even though no one was outside to see me. When I reached the porch, I pounded on the door with fists I could not feel. An old man opened it with a shotgun in his hands. I could barely form the words. "Lost wife still out there, please help." He looked at me for a long moment in the doorway. Then he lowered the gun and pulled me inside, and the heat from his wood stove hit me like a wall I had not known I needed to run into. He wrapped me in blankets, handed me something hot, picked up a landline telephone and called search and rescue while I sat shaking so hard I could barely hold the cup. His name was Howard. Not the same Howard from the story before, a different Howard, an old man who had lived on that mountain for 40 years and knew every inch of it. He told the rescue team where I had come from based on my description, described the logging operation and the creek and the fence line, and they recalculated their search grid. I had to wait. The paramedic who stayed with me would not let me go out. My core temperature was dangerously low. Every minute that passed felt like a separate small suffering. I kept thinking about Naomi, about how she was smaller than me and would lose heat faster, about what 40 minutes had meant on that ice floe the year before, except this time it was not about me. At 9:30, the radio crackled and the cabin went silent. They had found someone, female, red jacket, conscious but hypothermic, coming down. Naomi had done everything right. The moment she realized we were separated, she stopped moving. She found shelter, a shallow depression under a rock overhang, barely big enough for her body, but enough to block the wind. She wrapped herself in the emergency blanket from her pack, the silver reflective kind, and she stayed there for almost 5 hours, trusting that I would get help and send someone back. One of the search team caught a flash of reflected light from his headlamp and investigated. She walked through the door of the cabin with mild frostbite on 3 fingers and moderate hypothermia, and the look of someone who has been through something that rearranged several of the bones in her understanding of the world. I held her until neither of us was shaking anymore. Howard stood in his kitchen and watched us with the quiet expression of a man who has seen the full range of outcomes this mountain offers and was glad to be witnessing this particular one. He told us we were lucky, stupid but lucky. We could not argue with either part. We hiked Crescent Peak the following summer, stood at the spot where we had lost each other and tried to understand what had happened. The storm had been a microburst, a localized weather event that formed and dissolved within a few hours, too small and too fast for regional forecasting to catch. Bad luck, pure and simple. But bad luck does not excuse bad decisions. I made plenty of those, and I carry them not as punishment, but as instruction. GPS beacons now, satellite communicators. We tell 3 people our exact route before we leave. We have a rule. If we ever get separated again, both of us stop immediately and stay exactly where we are and wait. Howard the Mountain Man passed away last year. I drove up to his property to pay my respects. Left a bottle of whiskey on his porch with a note that said thank you, though no one was there to read it. Some debts you cannot repay. You just carry them and try to be worthy of the second chance. We are halfway through tonight, and I want to take 1 second to ask you something. If you have not subscribed to Creepyverse yet, do it right now. Right now. Because the next 4 stories are the ones that stay with you when you turn the lights off tonight. They are the ones that make you check the locks twice. Do not let the algorithm hide this from you next week. Subscribe, hit the bell, and let us keep going. Story 6. Christmas Eve on Birwood Lane. Some of the most dangerous moments in life are the ones wrapped in warmth and light and the sound of children laughing. Not because happiness makes you careless, though it can, but because the contrast between what you have and what is about to happen to it makes the threat, when it finally arrives, feel like it is coming from a direction that should not be possible, like something has broken a rule that ought to be unbreakable. Saturday night, December 24th, 2022. My wife Denise and I had been in our house on Birwood Lane for 8 months, a modest 2-story in a quiet neighborhood outside of Richmond, Virginia, the kind of house that requires 14 years of grinding and compromise and stubborn persistence to finally stand in front of on a Tuesday afternoon and hold the keys to and understand that you actually own it. I had graduated college in 2008 into a recession that ate the job market for breakfast, and had spent the decade and a half since that moment clawing towards something that looked like stability. This house was the proof that it had been worth it. That night, it was full of people and food and noise in all the right ways. My parents, driven up from North Carolina, Denise's sister Maggie and her husband Owen, and their 2 kids, plus our own daughter Sophie, who had just turned 4. 9 people in a house that felt exactly big enough and not 1 inch more. The kitchen smelled like honey-glazed ham. My mother's sweet potato casserole was in the oven. Sophie was running circles around the Christmas tree with her cousins, their combined laughter filling every room in a way that made the walls seem closer and warmer. Owen was in the middle of one of his legendary long-winded fishing stories that he tells with such genuine enthusiasm for his own narrative that nobody has the heart to stop him. The first knock came around 8 o'clock. I was clearing dinner plates when I heard it. Not loud, not aggressive. A normal knock at a normal volume, the kind you would make if you were a neighbor stopping by to exchange holiday greetings. I caught Denise's eye across the dining room and she shrugged, and I set the plates on the counter and walked toward the front door. The porch light was on. Through the frosted glass panel beside the door I could see shapes. More than 1 person. 4 shapes, dark against the yellow light, standing on my porch. Something about the way they were standing stopped me 2 steps before I reached the handle. I could not have articulated it immediately, but I can now. They were not moving. They were not talking to each other the way a group of people stand on a porch and talk while they wait for someone to answer the door. They were just standing, still, arranged in a way that felt less like people waiting and more like people positioned. I opened the door about halfway. 4 of them, 3 men, 1 woman, none dressed for the December cold. One of the men wore a thin denim jacket over a flannel shirt. The woman had a hoodie with the sleeves pushed up despite the temperature being in the low 30s. They ranged from maybe early 20s to somewhere around 50 and did not look related to each other in any way. The oldest, a heavyset man with a patchy grey beard and deep-set eyes that caught the porch light in a way that turned them almost yellow, stepped forward and smiled at me with his teeth. He said they were friends of Owen, that Owen had invited them to stop by for dessert, and he apologized for showing up without calling ahead. I turned my head and called Owen's name. He appeared in the hallway behind me with a confused look that I had never needed to read before, but read immediately and completely. He shook his head. When I turned back to the group, the story had already changed. The woman said they were actually friends of Maggie from her church group. I went and got Maggie, who stood in the doorway beside me and looked at all four of them and said she had never seen any of them before in her life and that she did not belong to any church group. The youngest man, a skinny kid with acne scars and a shaved head, laughed in the particular way that people laugh when a script has gone off rails and they do not have another one ready. He said there must have been a mix-up. Wrong house, probably. But he did not move. None of them moved. They stood on my porch in the cold and watched us with that patient, calculating blankness behind the surface performance of social normality. And I felt something in my gut that I had never felt on my own front porch on Christmas Eve. Danger. The plain, simple, animal recognition of it. The heavyset man asked if they could at least come inside for a minute to warm up while they sorted out where they were supposed to be. I told him I was sorry, but this was a private family dinner, and I was not able to let strangers in. Something moved in his eyes when I said that, a very brief tightening around the mouth, gone as quickly as it came. He nodded slowly, theatrically, the performance of a man accepting a gracious refusal, and then he turned to the others and made a gesture with his hand. A small gesture, a movement of his fingers. And without another word, all four of them stepped off my porch and walked across the front yard, and I watched them through the glass as they reached the sidewalk. They split up. The woman and the young man with the shaved head went left and disappeared around the corner of my neighbor's fence. The heavyset man and a fourth person I had barely noticed, a wiry man in his 40s who had not spoken a single word the entire time, went right and vanished into the shadows between the streetlights. I locked the front door and stood in the entryway and told myself it was nothing. Confused people, wrong address. I told Denise the same thing when she asked. I believed it, or told myself I believed it, for approximately 3 minutes. Then I heard the back door handle rattle. Slow, deliberate. The sound of a handle being tested with the full knowledge that the person testing it does not want the occupants to hear, and with the experience that comes from having done this enough times to almost get that part right. I put the plates down so hard one cracked. I moved to the kitchen. Through the curtain on the back door window, I could see a shape standing just outside. Not knocking, not calling out. Just working the handle back and forth, exploring, learning the resistance of the lock. I yanked the curtain aside. The woman with the stringy blonde hair was standing so close to the glass that her breath had left a circle of fog on the surface. Our eyes met. She did not step back. She did not look surprised. She looked at me with an expression that had the blank, patient quality of someone who has done the calculation and knows the outcome and is not troubled by the journey between the 2 points. She smiled, a wide, empty smile that showed too many teeth. Then she stepped back into the darkness of my yard. I called 911 from the kitchen counter, told the dispatcher there were people surrounding my house, that they were attempting the back entrance, that I had 9 people inside, including 3 small children. She asked for my address. I gave it. She told me units were being dispatched. Stay on the line. Owen was at the dining room windows. He came back and said there was someone moving along the side of the house, close to the wall, using the shadows. My father appeared in the kitchen doorway holding the carving knife from the dinner table, his face pale, but set in a hard line that I had seen once before in my life, a long time ago, and had hoped never to see again. We gathered everyone into the living room. Denise sat on the floor with the 3 children and read Sophie's new Christmas book in a voice that barely trembled. My mother sat beside them with her hand on Sophie's back and her lips moving in what I believe was a prayer. Owen and my father and I watched the doors and the main windows. Maggie stood near the hallway with her phone out, recording the front yard through a gap in the curtains. The dispatcher told me 7 minutes, then 5, then 3. I kept waiting for glass to break. I kept waiting for the sound of a door giving way. Instead, there was silence from outside, which was in some ways more frightening. The absence of sound from people who I knew were still out there, still circling, still looking for the point where we were most exposed. At 9:14, the walls of my living room went red and blue. I have never felt relief like that in my entire life. 2 patrol cars at the curb, 4 officers out with flashlights. I met the first one on the porch and told him everything, the initial knock, the changing stories, the scatter, the woman at the back door. He listened without interrupting. His partner searched the perimeter. They found footprints in the frost-covered grass, 4 distinct sets, leading from the back door toward the fence line and disappearing into the neighbor's property. They found nothing else. A neighbor 3 houses down had seen a white van parked at the end of the block earlier in the evening, a van she had not recognized, and it was gone by the time the patrol cars arrived. The officer told me there had been a string of home invasions in the county over the past several months, all targeting houses during family gatherings when the occupants would be distracted and the doors might be unlocked. He said we were lucky. He said the speed of our call and the fact that we had not opened the door were probably what saved us. He did not tell me what had happened to the families who had been neither as suspicious nor as fast. They never found them. A month later, I read in the local paper that a family in the next county had been robbed at gunpoint on New Year's Day. 4 intruders who had talked their way inside by claiming to be lost and needing to use a phone. I stared at that article for a long time. I thought about the woman at the back door, the smile with too many teeth, the fog from her breath on the glass. I thought about my daughter Sophie, 4 years old, running circles around the Christmas tree an hour before those 4 people arrived on my porch. I checked all the locks and did not sleep. Story 7. The Night Shift. The winter I took the night shift at the 24-hour convenience store, I was in community college and trying to save enough money to move out of my cousin's apartment. Night shifts were quiet, predictable. Just the empty aisles and the hum of the freezer units and the particular fluorescent loneliness of a place designed to serve people at hours when people should not need serving. I liked it. I liked having the whole place to myself, the meditative repetition of restocking and reorganizing during the slow hours. The store manager had a rule: lock the doors between 2 and 3 in the morning so we could restock safely. I hated that hour. Customers could see the lights on and still come up to the door, and I would have to mime closed through the glass like an idiot. Usually they just walked away. That night, at about 1 in the morning, I was pacing the aisles reorganizing things that did not need reorganizing when I heard sharp tapping on the front window. Quick, uneven, urgent. A man stood outside wrapped in a thin hoodie so stiff with frost it looked like it had been starched. Hair plastered to his forehead. Face carrying that pinched, desperate look that the cold carves into a person's features when they have been outside in it long enough. He mouthed something, then knocked again faster. I walked up to the door. Before I could say anything, he pressed his palm flat against the glass and said, "Please, can you just let me in for a minute, just to warm up, just 1 minute." His voice had the trembling edge that makes every human instinct in your body lean toward yes. I shook my head and explained through the door speaker that I could not unlock the doors during restock hours. It was not a flexible rule. His expression shifted, not anger, a tightening around the jaw that was something more specific than anger, a recalibration of some kind, the adjustment of someone who has received information that was not in the original plan. And then his gaze slid past me toward the back of the store. I turned to look. Nothing. But when I turned back, I noticed what I had not noticed before. A second man, standing several feet behind the first one in the snow. Dark coat, hands in his pockets, not shivering, not trying to get closer, not doing anything that a person stranded in the cold would do. Just standing there in the darkness beyond the store's overhang, entirely still, watching. The first man knocked harder. Each strike echoed through the empty store. And then both of them moved, in opposite directions, simultaneously, toward the side entrances, testing handles, moving with the coordination of people who have rehearsed a specific set of motions for a specific set of circumstances, never speaking to each other, never calling out, just working the building, learning it. I went behind the counter and hit the security lock button. Through the side window, I watched the first man tugging at a door handle with enough force to vibrate the entire frame. The second man walked slower, a careful patrol along the rear wall, dragging his boots through the snow in a methodical line, measuring, calculating. I tried the overnight manager. Voicemail. The silence after the beep was one of the loneliest sounds I have heard. I crouched behind the counter and watched through the lower portion of the glass. And then I noticed the car. Parked at the far end of the lot. I had not seen it when I came on shift, which was strange because the lot was empty at that hour and I would have noticed. A car with its trunk wide open. The interior trunk light flickering, the bulb going slowly out, but still throwing enough light to make the open trunk impossible to ignore. Just sitting there, open, empty, waiting. The image made me nauseous in a way I could not fully explain at the time. It took me a while to understand what my body understood before my brain caught up. The first man reappeared at the front window. This time he was not knocking. He was pressed close to the glass, his breath spreading across it in frantic patterns, his eyes scanning the interior in a slow, methodical sweep, counting steps, mapping the aisles. He tried the door one final time, and when it did not open, he stepped aside, and the second man came into view from the opposite direction, and they exchanged a look that was not communication so much as confirmation. Then both walked briskly toward the back of the building. I called 911, whispered because my voice felt too loud for the space, told the dispatcher about the two men circling the building, about the open trunk at the far end of the lot. While I was on the call, a sharp metallic clang hit the back door. Then another, steady, deliberate strikes. The dispatcher told me an officer was on the way but several minutes out. The clanging stopped, replaced by a long, slow, dragging sound along the rear exterior wall of the building, something heavy being moved into position. The sound paused every few seconds and then continued, like someone making spatial calculations, determining angles. Then the security lights on the side of the building tripped, flooding the lot in sharp white. I looked through the side window and saw both men near their car, not at the door anymore. The first man paced in a tight circle, rubbing his sleeves in the focused way of someone preparing for something physical. The second man stood beside the open trunk. The lights clicked off, darkness rushed back. A moment later, footsteps at the front door, one set. I raised my head just above the counter. The first man was back at the glass, leaning close, his breath spreading across the surface. He was not knocking, he was not speaking. He was just looking in, patient, almost expectant, like he thought something had changed inside the building while he had been out of sight, and he was checking to confirm it. Headlights swept across the parking lot. A patrol car rolled in, tires crunching on the ice. The man at the door snapped his head toward the lot and ran. The second man slammed the trunk shut, hard, both of them in the car before the officer was fully out of his vehicle. The engine revved, and the car fishtailed out of the lot, spraying snow, and was gone. The officer stayed until sunrise. He walked the perimeter with me, his flashlight on the back wall and the disturbed snow near the rear entrance, and he found nothing that would qualify as evidence. Just smeared patches in the snow where the ground had been disturbed, and the knowledge, sitting in the room between us, that we both understood what had been happening and what would have happened if the patrol car had been 10 minutes later. I still work nights sometimes. Different place now. Better locks. But whenever I hear someone knock on a door they should not be at, in weather they should not be out in, my body remembers that night before my brain does. And I think about the open trunk at the far end of the lot. I think about it, and I do not open the door. Story 8. The Men in the Vests. The evening had turned into one of those stubborn winter storms that appears out of nowhere, even when the forecast has only mentioned flurries. I was heading back from a consulting job, driving a rural road that barely saw traffic in good weather, and when the snow thickened and the wind picked up, and my tires found a sheet of black ice on a curve, I ended up lodged against a sloped patch of frozen dirt, with my wheels spinning uselessly and nothing visible in any direction but trees and dark. I sat in the car with the heater running and tried to decide whether to wait for someone to pass or attempt rocking the car free on my own. My phone had been flickering between one bar and no signal for the last 20 minutes. The road was the kind of road people chose only if they lived nearby or had no other option. I had not seen headlights in close to half an hour. So when headlights appeared behind me, rounding the bend and slowing as they approached my car, I felt the kind of relief that reorganizes your entire chest. Finally, someone else. Someone who might have a tow strap or a phone signal or at minimum, a human face to confirm that I was not alone on this road in this storm. The truck stopped a little closer to my bumper than seemed strictly necessary in weather like that. 2 men stepped out, both wearing reflective vests, the kind that road crew members or emergency volunteers wear. One of them waved at me with the confident, assertive motion of someone who has managed roadside emergencies before. The sight of those vests did more than the headlights had to relax the tight thing in my chest. I opened my door and leaned out. The first man approached at a steady pace, boots crunching through the snow in a slow, heavy rhythm. Late 30s, clean-shaven, square jaw. His voice carried easily over the wind. He told me they were volunteer responders who patrolled the rural roads during storms. His partner hung back near the tailgate of the truck, hands inside his vest. Something about the coordination between them nagged at me before I could name what it was. They moved like people imitating a role they had studied rather than people who actually performed it. The performance was good, but the seams were visible if you looked at the right parts. I looked at their vests. The patterns did not match. One had bright orange stripes running horizontally. The other had narrow diagonal ones in dull yellow. Different organizations, maybe, but the kind of difference that does not make sense if you are actually a coordinated volunteer response team. And behind them, the truck had no markings at all, not even a removable magnetic decal. Just a plain pickup with a truck bed, containing an old blue cooler and a single tarp that looked brand new against the weathered rest of the vehicle. A brand new tarp. That detail ran through me like cold water. The man closest to me leaned in slightly and lowered his voice, though we were alone on a rural road in a storm, and there was no one within a mile for whom he could have been performing discretion. He said the cold could mess with a person fast in storms like this, and that I should come get into their truck to warm up while they worked on freeing my car. His tone had the particular quality of false calm that experienced manipulators use when they need to steer someone toward a decision without making the steering visible. The tone that makes an option sound like the obvious and only choice. I told him my heater was still working, and I was fine staying in my car. His posture tightened, not dramatically, the kind of change that a person notices only if they are already paying the right kind of attention, and by that point, I was paying every kind. Behind him, his partner began moving toward the back of my car. Measured steps. Too much purpose for someone who was just standing around waiting for a stranded driver to make up her mind. One step, pause. Another step, pause. Not hurrying. Not trying to look like he was hurrying. Just relocating himself methodically into a position that I recognized after a moment as the position behind my car that would block any possibility of me reversing out. The space around me had become a geometry, both men at different points, me in the middle, the truck blocking the road behind me and the drainage ditch cutting off the shoulder, the storm pressing in from every direction. The world reduced to a small, cold, carefully arranged trap. The first man's hand moved inside his jacket. Slow, subtle, the hand of someone reaching for something they want to have ready without advertising the reach. Not threatening, much worse than threatening, deliberate, prepared. My breath caught. I pulled my leg back into the car and shut the door, not slamming it. Firmly, clearly. He grabbed the handle immediately. A fast, automatic reach. The grab of someone who expected the door to still be unlocked and was operating on muscle memory when it was not. When it did not open, he leaned toward the window and told me I was making things harder than they needed to be. His voice had lost the false calm, not replaced by anger, replaced by something flatter and more honest. The tone of someone dropping a pretense they have decided is no longer necessary. I reached down and hit the button that locked all 4 doors at once. The quiet click of the locks engaging was the smallest sound imaginable. The change it produced in his face was not small at all. He stopped pretending entirely. I put the car in gear. The wheels spun. The man behind my car placed both hands against the trunk in the patient, immovable way of someone who has done this before and is confident in the outcome. The headlights threw his shadow across the snow in a shape that stretched and warped until it looked like nothing human. I rocked the car. Forward, backward, each attempt a negotiation with the ice beneath my tires. The first man knocked on my window, rhythmically, not angrily, like he was waiting out a clock he knew was in his favor. A gust hit the trees overhead, and a sheet of accumulated snow crashed down on my hood. Both men startled, fractionally, a half-second of interrupted focus. I went for it. The back right tire found a patch of ice with enough texture to catch. The car jerked sideways, lurched, almost stalled. The man behind me stepped back or he would have been clipped. I did not wait. I accelerated. The car fishtailed hard on the road, and I let it fishtail, kept my hands light on the wheel, let the physics do what physics does until the tires found traction and the car straightened, and I was moving. In the mirror, their headlights shrank in the snow. They did not follow me. At least not that I ever saw. I drove until the first cluster of porch lights appeared through the thinning storm, and only then, only there, in the visible evidence of people living their ordinary lives inside lit houses, did I pull over and allow myself to breathe. I never filed a report. No names, no plates, nothing that would stand up to the question of what exactly happened. But I think about those mismatched vests. I think about the brand new tarp in the truck bed. I think about the open trunk of the car in the convenience store parking lot from the story before. And I think about how winter creates these windows of vulnerability that certain kinds of people learn to recognize and use, and how the storm is never the most dangerous thing out there in the dark. Whoever they were, whatever they had planned for that lonely road, they were not there to help me. And I knew it just in time. We are almost at the end, but the last story is the one that will follow you home tonight. Before we get there, if you have watched this far, I want you to do two things. First, leave a comment below with the one story from tonight that hit you hardest. I read every single comment. Second, if you know someone who needs to hear these stories before the next winter storm season, share this video with them right now. It takes 10 seconds, and it might matter more than you think. One story left. Let us finish this. Story 9. The Man in the Trees. Snow trips were not really my thing back then, but that winter I was trying hard to get out of a rut. My friend Jordan had suggested a day hike on a popular trail near his town, a trail families visited for photos whenever fresh snow made the landscape look like something from a calendar. Safe, well marked, nothing that would challenge an intermediate hiker on a clear winter morning. The sky had that chalky grey look when we started that made the whole landscape feel flat and slightly unrealized, like a painting that had not been finished yet. Jordan kept joking about how it felt like walking through an old postcard. I remember the way the cold made every sound sharp and immediate, twigs snapping with the percussive clarity of sounds that should be farther away than they turned out to be. We were maybe an hour in when the first scream cut through the trees. High, raw, and panicked. The kind of sound that locks your jaw before your brain has fully processed that you heard it. Jordan stopped mid-sentence and stared at me. We both stood very still. The sound was not animal in any way I could identify, not the cry of a bird or the distress call of a deer, and nothing I had heard before in any outdoor setting matched its quality. After it stopped, the woods went unusually still, the ambient sounds of wind and branches cutting out in a way that felt more like held breath than natural quiet. We looked at each other. We followed the trail a little farther, half expecting another hiker to come running toward us asking for help. No one came. The silence kept stretching, dense and attentive in a way that outdoor silence usually is not. I kept tugging my scarf against my chin, a gesture that had nothing to do with the cold. We went off trail. The snow was fresh enough to hold footprints, and we thought we might find some animal in distress, some indication of what had made that sound. Instead, we found a single line of human boot prints, deep, sharp impressions veering off the trail into a narrow pocket of trees where the branches grew into a crooked arch overhead. No animal prints, no drag marks, just the deliberate, evenly spaced steps of a person who was walking somewhere with purpose. Jordan called out. His voice bounced off the trees in a way that felt wrong, like the forest was redirecting the sound back to us rather than carrying it forward. We followed the prints a short distance before we saw him. A man standing between the trees about 50 yards ahead. Dark coat dusted with accumulated snow. His posture rigid and perfectly still, the way a person stands when they have been in one position for long enough that their body has settled into it completely. He was facing in our direction. He did not wave. He did not speak. He did not shift his weight in the normal, unconscious way that a stationary human being shifts their weight. He just looked at us. Jordan called out again. The man did not react. And then, without hurrying, he turned and walked deeper into the woods. His footprints behind him were the same neat, evenly spaced line as the ones we had been following. Jordan said we should not assume anything bad. He said the man was probably lost or confused or some perfectly ordinary explanation. I said we should keep following the trail and go back the way we came. Jordan won the argument. He usually did. The woods got thicker as we went. The official trail had vanished behind us, swallowed by cold air and the density of the trees. Neither of us said anything about being turned around because saying it would have made it more real. Each time we paused, a sound carried through the woods, sometimes a short, clipped cry, sometimes something that mimicked a gasp, coming from slightly left of where you would expect it, shifting position the moment you tried to pinpoint it. Every time I looked in the direction the sound had come from, there was nothing visible. Just that flat, washed-out winter landscape, smudged and featureless in the grey light. He appeared a second time, nearer than before, but still in that same frozen pose, the rigid stillness of something that is not actually cold. His coat looked heavier now with accumulated snow, and he stood at an odd angle, as though his feet were planted while his upper body leaned slightly forward, like a person listening for something below the level of audible sound. When he saw we were looking, he stepped away into a narrow valley between two ridges. Not a normal walking motion, too smooth, too deliberate. The movement of someone retracing steps they have taken enough times to have worn a groove in the muscle memory. Jordan said he was probably injured. I kept focusing on the fact that he had never once made any gesture that a lost or injured person would make. No waving, no calling out, no signaling, just appearing and waiting and moving away when we saw him. The structure of it had a pattern that I could feel before I could name it. Then the screams came again, closer this time, and they were not coming from one direction. They were coming from multiple directions, overlapping, as though the same sound was being produced from several points simultaneously and allowed to collide in the air between the trees. The echoes were not random. They moved in a circle around us. I stopped walking so suddenly that Jordan ran into me, and we stood there together and listened, and we both understood at the same time what the sound was doing. It was herding us. Jordan said quietly that we needed to go back the way we came, right now. But the snow had already filled our footprints, and every direction looked identical. The only path still clear was the trail the man had made. We followed the valley he had taken, because it was the only option that did not feel like pure randomness. The air there was heavier, muffled in a way that outdoor air should not be. The trees so close overhead that their branches curved like ribs, and the snow between them looked untouched. Untouched by anything except the line of boot prints we kept following. Jordan grabbed my sleeve. There he was again, center of a small clearing, perfectly still. And this time he lifted one arm, not waving, not pointing, raising it slightly, held at an angle like a marker indicating a direction, like a signpost shaped like a person. And then the woods around us produced one long, dragging scream that seemed to come from the trees themselves, from every tree simultaneously, a sound that did not belong in any category of natural noise I had ever catalogued, and it came from everywhere at once. The man lowered his arm and turned away and slipped between trees, so densely packed they looked stitched together. We ran. There was no decision. There was no conversation. Jordan and I were running, branches tearing at our jackets, snow exploding up from our footfalls, lungs burning in the cold, and I did not care which direction we were going as long as it was away. The woods blurred into streaks of white and grey and dark. The screaming stopped. The footsteps stopped. Every sound stopped simultaneously, the way a recording ends when someone lifts the needle. When we stumbled into a clearing with a faded wooden trail marker half buried in snow, we both slowed, and then stopped and stood for a moment in the relief of recognizing something. The woods behind us were silent in a way that felt intentional, like something had decided we were no longer interesting. We did not talk on the way back to the parking lot. We kept expecting to hear another sound or see that figure standing somewhere along the trail. The woods stayed silent the entire hike out. At the trailhead, 2 rangers were checking the posted conditions board. They asked if we had gone off trail, because they had found sets of boot prints heading into areas nobody should be in that time of year. We told them everything, every scream, every appearance, the way his footprints kept intersecting our path in places we had never walked. One of the ranger's faces tightened in a way he tried immediately to hide. He said sound behaves strangely in cold weather, that people convince themselves they are being followed when they are not, that it was easy to get turned around in winter conditions. Then he added quietly, not looking at us directly, "If you ever hear screaming in that forest again, leave immediately. No investigating, no trying to help, just leave." We asked why. He did not answer. He just looked back at the trail conditions board and said, "Have a safe drive back." We never found out who the man was. We never found out what was happening in those woods. Jordan refuses to drive near that area now, and I have not been back to that trail since. I think about the way the screams circled us, the way the footprints appeared at a perfect right angle to our path in places we knew we had never walked, the way the man stood so still in the cold that there was no visible breath rising from him. I think about what the ranger said, and I think about the difference between an encounter that ends badly and an encounter that ends in time, and how thin that line is, and how rarely people understand how close they have stood to it until they are safely on the other side. Whatever was in those woods that day, it was patient. It knew the terrain far better than we did, and if we had not run when we ran, if we had followed those footprints one more time into one more clearing, I do not believe we would have found the trail marker. I do not believe we would have found our way out at all. 9 stories, 9 moments when winter became something more than weather, when the cold and the dark became the context for something far more dangerous than the temperature outside. Ice that breaks under your feet, a voice that switches off like a light, sounds from under the floor, a gun in the hands of a man whose mind has gone somewhere unreachable, a storm that separates you from the person you love, strangers on a Christmas porch with patient eyes, a car with its trunk open in an empty parking lot, men in mismatched vests on a dark rural road, a figure in the trees that leaves footprints leading inward and never outward. What connects all of these is not the cold. It is the isolation that the cold creates. The way winter strips away the things we depend on, the signal bars, the open roads, the neighbors close enough to hear us, the light that lets us see what is coming. Winter does not create danger. It removes protection. And the things that were already out there in the dark, the natural hazards and the calculated threats and the unpredictable human crises, step into the space where protection used to be and fill it. The lesson is not to fear winter. The lesson is to respect what it does to your margins. Check in with someone before you go. Tell people where you are. Pay attention to the warnings your body sends you before your brain has caught up with the language. And if something feels wrong, if the voice changes, if the vests do not match, if the footprints circle your house 3 times without leaving, trust that feeling. Trust it completely and act on it immediately. That is it for tonight. Thank you for being here at Creepyverse. If these stories kept you up, if they made you check your locks or text someone you love to make sure they are okay, then they did exactly what they were supposed to do. Drop a comment below with where you watched this from and which story hit you the hardest. I read every single one, and I respond to as many as I can. If you want to make sure you catch the next video, subscribe and hit the bell, because the algorithm is not always generous, and the best way to make sure these stories reach you is to tell YouTube directly that you want them. Like this video, if it kept you watching all the way through. It genuinely helps this channel grow, and it helps these stories reach people who might need to hear them. Until next time, stay safe out there. Keep your doors locked, watch the weather, and remember that the most dangerous thing about a blizzard is not the storm itself. It is what was already outside before it hit. This has been Creepyverse. We will see you in the dark.